Today, we're going to talk about when you should be using a dehumidifier in your trailer. So we'll go over when you should be using one and when you shouldn't be using one, and we'll also show you our favorite dehumidifier that we use when we camp in our travel trailer. Now, ideally, you want the humidity in your trailer to be between 40 to 45%. Of course, that isn't always easy to gauge. We have a RV tag temperature tracker that we've been using to kind of test out the different humidities and what impacts it. And so if you have a way to check the humidity, that's great. But chances are you're not going to have something like that. So let's go over a few things to look for that will help you identify when you should be using a dehumidifier and when you maybe don't need one. Okay, so first let's start with the conditions that you want to look for to know that you should be using a dehumidifier. The first is if the humidity is over 50%. And as we just discussed, sometimes that's not the easiest thing to track. If you're using any kind of digital temperature gauge to monitor the temperature inside your trailer, that might have the humidity on it as well. But if not, there are other ways that you could identify if the humidity is high. The first is by looking at the windows. If you have condensation or fog on the windows, then you'll want to use a dehumidifier. And you'll notice this most often in the morning. You'll see that the windows have a bunch of moisture on them. And that's a sign that you'll want a dehumidifier in the trailer. Probably would have been great if you had one the night before, but it's not too late to just take one out at that point. The next is if you cook or shower inside of your trailer, this is going to add more moisture in the trailer. So that's another time where you would want to have a dehumidifier out to help balance with the extra moisture that you're putting in the air. If you're sleeping in colder temperatures, you'll want to have a dehumidifier out while you're sleeping. Now, what does it mean, colder temperatures? This is going to differ depending on the region, but basically, if overnight, if it's going to be under 40 degrees Fahrenheit, or if you're in a condition where you're not going to have any vents or windows open, or you're going to be running your propane heater. Those are all signs that you're camping in colder temperature and it's going to be cold overnight, and so you should use a dehumidifier. The next is if you're camping during the rainy season. This is another one that's going to vary depending on your region. For us, this is around November through April. If we're camping anywhere in that time, we know that there's going to be more moisture in the air and less airflow, less windows open. So that's another time where we'd want to use a dehumidifier. And then lastly is if you're camping in a coastal region. If you're near the coast, again, there's going to be more moisture in the air. And so there's going to be more moisture in the trailer. So that's another great time to use a dehumidifier. Okay, and then when should you not use a dehumidifier? Should you just always have one out? And the answer to that is no. You don't want to just always have one out because the air could get too dry. You don't want it to be too dry. It could start irritating your skin, your nose, that kind of thing. So you don't need to use a dehumidifier all the time. There are times when the air will be drier and it won't be necessary. So if the humidity is under 30%, then you don't need to use a dehumidifier. If that isn't something easy to track, some other things you could look for is if you have good ventilation, then you don't need to use a dehumidifier. If you could have your ceiling vents open or your windows open, if you're getting good airflow through the trailer, the airflow will help with the moisture, and so you're not going to need to use the dehumidifier. If it's during the summer months, of course, this is going to vary by region, but for the most part, during the summer, you don't need to use the dehumidifier because the air is drier. And then if you're camping in a dry area, then there won't be as much moisture in the air and you don't need to use the dehumidifier. Now let's talk about the different types of dehumidifiers that you can use. So you can get a dehumidifier that's plugged in and it has kind of a drainage bucket and it captures all the moisture and then you can dump it out and you just keep using the same device. Now, what we don't like about those is they require a 110 outlet. You need to have them plugged in. So we don't use those types of dehumidifiers. We like to use the rechargeable dehumidifiers. So we like to use the dehumidifiers that have the beads inside, the color changing beads, and they start off yellow or orange, and then when they get moisture in them, they turn black or purple, they get darker, and then you just recharge the unit to refresh those beads, and then you could continue using it. The nice thing about these rechargeable units is that they don't need to be plugged into the wall. They do need to be plugged in while you're recharging them, but then once they're refreshed, they're ready to go again, and you don't have to worry about having a device plugged in. This is nice because then you don't need to have full hookups to be able to use your dehumidifier. And what I like to do is have a couple of dehumidifiers that I rotate through, and I keep them in a sealed Ziploc bag. That way there isn't any moisture getting into the unit. And then when we're ready to use it, we have a brand new recharged unit that we can pull out that hasn't been absorbing moisture while it's just been sitting in storage in the trailer. Now, originally, the dehumidifier that we used to use was the EvaDry E500. And this unit worked well. We really didn't have any issues with it. The problem was that when it was time to recharge it, there was no auto shutoff feature. So you take the device and you just plug it into the wall, but then it would sit there for hours and it would get extremely hot. And if we weren't around to unplug it, it would just sit there and continue to heat up. Not only were we concerned that that would be a fire issue, which it wasn't, we never had a problem with that, but it ended up burning itself out. It got to a point where it wasn't reusable anymore. We couldn't get the moisture out of the beads. Whatever system it had to dry itself out just stopped working, probably because it got extremely overheated. So not only did the device stop working, but even when it was working, it did constantly stress us out just because of the extreme temperatures that it would get to. So now we use a different dehumidifier and we are very happy with it. Now, I am not sure exactly how to say this brand name, but I'm going to guess that it's Afloya. So we've been using these Afloya Many Dehumidifiers and they work out really nice. So they have a recharging base station and then the dehumidifier just sits in that base station. It has an auto shut off feature and we haven't had any problems with it. It works flawlessly. So within just a couple of hours, it is completely refreshed and recharged and the beads are back to the pale orange color. Now, what I like to do is keep 2 of the dehumidifiers on hand. When we go on a trip, I make sure that they're both charged up and then I put them in a Ziploc bag so that it's not getting any moisture from the air. And then I only use one at a time, so I have one that's recharged. If I do have to recharge it while we're on a trip, I do bring the charging base station, but I make sure to do that outside of the trailer. I don't want that moisture to go back into the air inside the trailer, so we just plug it in the plugs right outside of the trailer if we do need to do that. For the most part, we don't need to recharge it while we're camping since we have 2 of them. It's only for extended trips, which typically we do those in the drier season and we're not using the dehumidifiers. So having 2 of these on hand works out really well for the times that we do need to use the dehumidifiers. Now, the last thing I wanted to go over is how many of these dehumidifiers should we be using? I mean, these ones that we use now are pretty small. Is it beneficial to put one in like one of the bunk beds and another one on the dinette table, or do you only use one? Now, like I said earlier, we do have that RV temperature sensor, and so we did try to do a little bit of testing to see if using 2 of these dehumidifiers in our 20-foot travel trailer worked better than 1, or if that was just overkill. And what we decided is 1 really seems like the right fit. In a 20-foot travel trailer, 1 of these mini dehumidifiers worked great. There were a few times where we'd wake up and there was more condensation on the windows than we would have liked. That is when we thought it was useful to take out a second dehumidifier just to help bring that moisture level down a little bit faster. But the times that happened were rare. It was primarily when the dehumidifier that we had been using didn't have a full charge to start with, and so maybe it just didn't absorb enough moisture throughout the night. So of course, this is going to vary depending on your region and the size of your trailer, but for us camping in Northern California in a 20-foot travel trailer, we found that one of these dehumidifiers is a great fit for us, and it's very convenient to have another one on hand to rotate them out. If you're interested in checking out the dehumidifier that we use, I will add a product link in the video description. I hope this helped give you some more information about when to use a dehumidifier and when it might not be necessary. If it helped, please subscribe. Thanks and happy camping.